man upstairs is playing cards again, shuffling the cards on the carpet. He is alone, drinking grapefruit juice, playing solitaire, masturbating once or twice a day. "You are my only friend," he said to me while shaving. "Oh, that's not true." "Maybe not," he said, "but it probably is true."
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
There is a man I know. This isn't a particularly smart man, but he seems to function well enough. He frequents the local dive bars and chats with anyone who will listen. Sometimes he talks about gambling or stock trading or Elon Musk, but most commonly he tends to pitch the same conspiracy over and over. He does this because he really believes that he has put the dots together. He has been enlightened and sees the truth. In his mind, given the evidence, this is an open and shut case. Most people just ignore his memes, rants, and the links that he posts, but I have been taking diligent notes. Now, this isn't just his conspiracy, but his version goes something like this. Big Pharma, the banks, big agriculture, the military-industrial complex, the media, the whole US foreign policy establishment, and probably other things I'm forgetting, are all being controlled by a secret Jewish cabal. Additionally, Marx was Jewish, which led to communism and the deaths of tens of millions. Oh, and to top it all off, the nuclear bomb was worked on by many scientists who were, you guessed it, Jewish. Wow, you might be thinking. That is a lot of things to tie together in the conspiracy. You would be right in thinking that. Tying together the nuclear bomb and big agriculture into one conspiracy is a feat of mental gymnastics so impressive that Simone Biles should take notes.
The answer is obvious, my friends. It is the Jews! Covetous Jews who have taken all our money and hoarded it for themselves. Hidden all the cash in some secret Jew cave that they built, probably back in the early 60s.
It's no surprise then that most of his close friends have stopped talking to him about this topic. I'm sure they're just intimidated by his bravery to speak out. But even if the logic and details of the conspiracy make no sense, that's not really the point. Conspiracies aren't appealing because of the airtight logic. They're appealing because they're able to explain complex problems in simple ways. And they are compelling because of how they tie the world together into a neat, digestible framework. Ladies and gentlemen, I hate to admit it, but I love conspiracy theories. They're some of the most captivating and infuriating content to consume. So, to all the people accusing us of just building a straw man argument to argue against in our population video, you probably don't consume as much dumpster tier content as we do. Yes, there are actually people who are predicting population decreases of upwards of 50%. This is different from the people who think that demographic change will just stress the economies and social programs of the affected countries. We were addressing the folks who are concerned about a complete catastrophe. Could these just be conspiracy brain jabronis? Sure, but also, this man has a role in our government.
Is population collapse.
Huh.
Collapse. Like, people have no idea how fast the population is going to collapse.
Anyway, why do we love conspiracies so much here at Detailed Diatribes? Well, they are comforting in a way. When you boil them down to the core message, a conspiracy is more or less just fan fiction about our world. They often wrap up events with a neat little bow, tying together all the details in a satisfying way. Real life often doesn't work like that. History and current events often aren't satisfying in the way that good fiction is. A good narrative makes sure that all the details you get are relevant and come together into a satisfying story arc. Reality is oftentimes confusing, and the details we get are disconnected and not always related. Assassinations, terrorist attacks, wars, bad economic conditions, landing on the moon, pandemics, hurricanes, mass shootings, seeing an ad about something you just mentioned. All of these things instantly spark conspiracy. Additionally, any concerning data trend will spark the same thing. Population going up rapidly, conspiracy. Birth rate dropping, conspiracy. Frickin' frogs turning gay, conspiracy.
I don't don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
But I'm not a conspiracy brain jabroni, you might think. I'm a free thinker, unlike the rest of the sheeple. Unfortunately, dear listener, even the most enlightened members of our species are doomed to suffer from some jabroniism. It is in fact baked into the fabric of our very beings. But how can you protect yourself from going down this dark path?
If once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny, consume you it will.
Is the dark side stronger?
No. Quicker, busier, more seductive.
Thankfully, most of these theories tend to have the same basic structure. And if you know the structure, recognizing it can become easier. There are 3 key components that make up these theories, all of which are intimately tied to our biology. Number 1 is that people are able to understand that others have their own emotions and goals. Other apes can do this somewhat, but to a much more limited degree. The animals attribute only 2 mental states, goal-seeking and perception. For instance, if a monkey sees food close to its trainer, and the trainer happens to be looking to the right, the animal will attempt to steal food from the left, suggesting that the monkey attributes perception to the trainer, as well as the goal of preventing the monkey from taking food. But the understanding of others stops there. Chimpanzee mothers do not recognize that their infants lack knowledge. They cannot comprehend, for example, that their children don't know how to crack nuts with rocks. Therefore, they do not teach them. A young ape might learn by seeing something done, but chimpanzees do not have the concept of knowledge. They do not distinguish a knowing individual from an ignorant one. They have a very limited model of others. Human beings, on the other hand, model others very well. In fact, we do this nearly compulsively. The problem is that people will often do this to such an extent that we model non-human systems as we model people.
We have mocked our economy, and now the economy has cast its vengeance upon us all.
He's right. This is the first guy to actually make sense.
Yea, it is an angry and unforgiving economy. To repent, we must stop frivolous spending. Instead of paying for cable, let us watch clouds!
The second important piece to this puzzle is that animals cannot get schizophrenia. This is a uniquely human disease. It would be logical, therefore, to assume that this represents a problem with abilities that only people have. Now, this isn't exactly the time for me to do a deep dive on everything schizophrenia related, but the short story is that the problem here is that this isn't a breakdown in function, it's more like too much of a good thing. Let's just look at one symptom to get the idea. Apophenia, seeing patterns in things that aren't there. The human brain is really good at putting patterns together, much better than really anything else in the animal kingdom. But that comes at a cost. If you want to detect patterns fast, that means that you're going to get some false positives. This is something that everyone does. We are all too quick to see patterns in things. It's where the gambler's fallacy comes from. In a schizophrenic patient, though, this is dialed up to an 11. The current model of cognition posits that there's a trade-off in predictive processing, where you can either give high weight to small errors, which will stop you from detecting patterns that aren't there, or you can give small weight to predictive errors, which allows you to detect higher level patterns at the cost of occasionally detecting patterns that don't exist, as in delusions or hallucinations. It isn't just seeing patterns that aren't there, however. We can misinterpret data in all kinds of ways. For the purposes of a conspiracy, besides just generating phantom patterns, we also commonly lump random events into the framework of an existing pattern or narrative. In addition to this, people tend to see trends and expect them to either go up or down forever. I'll call this the classic line go up forever delusion.
Now in a moment, we're going to take one more ping pong ball and we're going to drop it in through this hole in the top, and it's going to set off a chain reaction. And in this chain reaction, the number of ping pong balls flying through the air is going to grow exponentially.
Now, I only bring up schizophrenia being a uniquely human disease, not to say that everyone is somewhat suffering from this, but just to say that this represents a core ability in the brain that you can't remove. Everybody is evaluating patterns and sometimes getting false positives. The third and last piece of this puzzle, which we touch on in part 1 of the Hitchhikers series, is the predictive processing model of the brain. Since you probably didn't watch that, allow me to give you a little recap. Your brain is operating by making predictions and trying to minimize the rate of error on those predictions. We call these expectations that the brain is operating on priors. These priors from different brain regions can be very basic things like expecting to hear a bark when a dog opens their mouth, or more complex things like expecting your friend to behave a certain way in a situation. When the world doesn't align with our expectations, we have to think in order to update the prior belief, or come up with some explanation of why that situation didn't actually match our beliefs. The net effect of this is that the brain can give us some pretty good and detailed models of the world, but it also has the hidden incentive of creating non-falsifiable internal schemas. Because thinking takes energy, when dealing with complex things, it's easier to come up with a simple explanation and just move on. Here, I posit this rule. The larger, more complex, and more uncertain a system is, the more likely we are to come up with a simple conspiratorial model to describe the phenomenon. Now, if you have no clue what I'm talking about or don't buy into the predictive processing model, what I'm saying here is really just an expanded way of thinking about confirmation bias. People are likely to develop internal schemas that are unlikely to be proven wrong. They will then overwhelmingly pay attention to only the data points that back up their belief. But confirmation bias usually doesn't happen for everyday things. If I think the grass is red, I will just be getting too much evidence on a daily basis to delude myself into thinking that, unless I am actually in psychosis and come up with a delusion that people paint the grass every morning or something else along those lines. Hopefully, you get the idea. The more complex or hard to predict a system is, the more people will gravitate towards confirmation bias. So, putting this all together, every conspiracy is a story. These stories involve putting together a pattern that isn't there or otherwise misinterpreting an event, and assigning human intentionality to the system that it may not have. One or both of these may be present. A good conspiracy is also crafted in a way that insulates itself from criticism, often due to it being a simple explanation that you will be able to find evidence for to satisfy our confirmation bias. We don't have to think like this, but given large and unpredictable events, it's more or less the default mode of operation. These are all things that we are naturally inclined as humans to do. I don't really feel like dipping my toes into the mud of any truly widespread conspiracies right now. So, let's just look at an extreme example of how to do this.
Look, when you realize how fake it all is, the football, the basketball, the Lady Gaga, the Justin Bieber, who gives you these carbon tax messages. They tell your kids they got to love Justin Bieber, and then Bieber says, hand in your guns, pass the Cybersecurity Act, and the police state's good, and then your children are turned into mindless vassals who now they look up to some twit instead of looking up to Thomas Jefferson or looking up to Nikola Tesla or looking up to Magellan. I mean, kids, Magellan's a lot cooler than Justin Bieber. He circumnavigated with one ship the entire planet. He was killed by wild natives before they got back to Portugal, and when they got back, there was only like 11 people alive of the 200 and something crew, and the entire ship was rotting down to the waterline. That's destiny. That's will. That's striving. That's being a trailblazer and explorer. Going into space, mathematics, quantum mechanics, the secrets of the universe. It's all there. Life is fiery with its beauty. It's incredible detail. Tuning into it. They want to shatter your mind talking about Justin Bieber.
It's a highly sophisticated interlocking brick system.
The phantom trend identified is that kids are supposedly looking up to celebrities more than they look up to Magellan or Tesla. Honestly, that's kind of a base take, and I love how he loses himself in the middle of the clip and just descends into ranting about how cool history and science is. But anyway, is this a trend? No, probably not. I would say that people looking up to popular or famous individuals who may or may not be great role models isn't new. Go to any playground and observe children and you'll know that this is the case. But it is a real phenomenon, new or not. He then ties this phenomenon back to a cabal of people who have supposedly orchestrated this trend in order to push their carbon tax agenda. Right, Justin Bieber was a liberal plant the whole time. The point here is that the basic anatomy is just assigning intentionality to a real or fabricated trend and then tying it into whatever ideology you want to push. It helps if that trend is already something that people have a disdain for, like new pop music or immigration.
The speeches we heard today are nothing more than words, but I will prove that I love my father more than anybody.
Okay, so we've established that conspiratorial thinking like this is how the brain is naturally incentivized to act when dealing with systems that are difficult to predict. If I'm just claiming that people have always been this way, then why does it seem to be getting worse? Is this just an illusion? Is the proliferation of conspiracies itself a conspiracy? We don't think so here at Detailed Diatribes. It probably has more to do with the forms of media which people are engaging with. Allow us to roll back to the 1800s. This was before TV, radio, or the internet. The mass media of the time was printed stories. By this time, the printing press had been around for a few hundred years and they were all over. Because of this, a newspaper had a relatively low cost to start up, leading to many different papers in a highly decentralized media environment. In this environment, someone trying to get into journalism will have to pander to an existing market. This meant that some papers were politically independent, but most, especially in smaller cities, had close ties to political parties, who used them for communication and campaigning.
You're part of their strategies. You're partisan, hacks.
Their editorials explained the party position on current issues and condemned the opposition. If they weren't directly controlled by a party, they were heavily incentivized to act as a tool for one. In 1850, the census counted that there was 1,600 party-affiliated newspapers and only 83 independent ones. So, in an environment like this, what did the type of press look like? The dominant strategy became to, as a paper, do whatever you can to cater to your readers. In 1879, Whitlaw Reid, the powerful longtime editor of the Republican New York Tribune, wrote, "There is an old question as to whether a newspaper controls public opinion, or public opinion controls the newspaper. This at least is true, that the editor best succeeds who best interprets the prevailing and the better tendencies of public opinion, and who, whatever his personal views concerning it, does not get himself too far out of relations to it."
Guys like us that work on ranches are the loneliest guys in the world. They got no family and they don't belong no place. They got nothing to look ahead to.
But not us, George. Tell about us.
Well, we ain't like that. No. We got a future.
So, he's saying, write what your viewers want to hear and not what you believe or what is necessarily true. This incentive structure led to a media with a culture of pitching conspiracies. It is from this period we get terms like yellow journalism, muckraking, and sensationalism. By the 1890s, newspapers had begun using large font, multi-column headlines to bait passerbys into buying the paper. I really hope you're seeing the parallels here to the environment that we're in now. So, what happened? Why did this seem to get better for a period? From the 1920s to the time that the internet passed television as the dominant form of media, people primarily consumed radio or TV. Radio and TV are not decentralized forms of media. Because there is a limited spectrum of radio wave frequencies, there is an inherent need for some control of the airwaves, at a minimum so people aren't broadcasting on the same channel and interfering with each other. This inherent need for central control and the finite nature of the system meant that it was much easier for governments to manage. With limited delivery sources, it's easier to have standards for your journalism and the dissemination of information. There are both positives and negatives to this. On the one hand, the quality of information is usually better. If you ask a traditional journalist to get a story on the FDA, they might do some investigation for a few months and come back with a scoop. But nowadays, guys like RFK can just do a quick Google search or put together some historical failures of the FDA and craft a narrative pretty much out of nowhere. A potential negative of the period of mass media was that it became easier for the government to influence what people believed. People often write books that at some level reflect what they see around them. It is from this period that we get stories like 1984 and the subsequent explosion of the genre of dystopian literature. With the rise of the internet, society has returned to decentralized media. The content goes through less filters and falls back on the natural incentive to pander to people's conspiratorial nature. Decisions on what people read are now decided by algorithms that cater to people's conscious or unconscious desires. And there's seemingly an endless amount of information to reinforce these priors that people have as much as they want. When a news event happens, people don't just want to see the event, they want a way to contextualize it into their pre-held beliefs without modifying them. Viewers will naturally stratify themselves if allowed to choose from a spectrum of politically opinionated news sources. They will watch content that both engages their executive function and justifies what they already think. In this way, reporting an event has become secondary to providing a way to think about it. Even the later versions of television and radio programs ended up following that model.
We need help from the media, and they're hurting us. And it's
now,
the idea is
if the indictment is, let me get this straight. If the indictment is, and I have seen you say this, that Crossfire reduces everything, as I said in the intro, to left, right, black, white.
Yes.
Well, it's because, see, we're a debate show. It's like saying the
No,
Weather Channel reduces
that'd be
everything
great.
to a storm front.
I would love to see a debate show.
In a 24-hour day where we have each side on as best we can get them.
That would be great.
And have them fight it out.
To do a debate would be great, but that's like saying pro wrestling is a show about athletic competition.
I think you're a good comedian. I think your lectures are boring. Let me ask you a question on the news.
Now, this is theater. I mean, it's obvious. How old are you?
35.
And you wear a bow tie.
Yeah, I do. I do.
So this is...
So, to circle back to my original question, is the conspiratorial nature of people getting worse? Well, no, but the media environment is allowing for the propagation of these ideas across our society like no other point in history. In terms of sheer number, speed at which they spread, and how certain people become of them, it has never been a better time to be a conspiracy brain jabroni. Now, if you have taken an anatomy class, you'll know that the biology folks are really big into relating the structure of something to its function. We already touched on one of the main functions of a conspiracy: coping. These are easy explanations to hard problems. It's honestly probably more comforting to believe that 9/11 was faked, because that means that the government had everything under control the whole time. There aren't actually bad actors in the world out to hurt people, it was all part of the plan. But conspiracies aren't just a coping mechanism, they do serve an additional purpose: grifting. Sometimes people capitalize on existing events or conspiracies to grift. But there is an entire other class of conspiracy that is only invented to further a grift. Think of a snake oil salesman, pitching a simple, elegant solution to a problem, then leaving town before people figure out that they bought a bottle of nothing, or that they're dead.
That's specious reasoning, Dad.
Thank you, honey.
By your logic, I could claim that this rock keeps tigers away.
Oh, how does it work?
It doesn't work.
Uh-huh.
It's just a stupid rock.
Uh-huh.
But I don't see any tigers around here, do you?
Lisa, I want to buy your rock.
You can grift by either pitching a fake solution to a real problem, or by pitching an entirely fake problem to sell an equally fake solution. The latter is the case in Scientology, where they hook people up to the stupid Thetan machines, or whatever you actually call them, and tell everyone that they have problems that only the Church of L. Ron Hubbard can fix. Why didn't you just stick to writing science fiction, Ron? Actually, I guess you did. Now, Any conspiracy theorist will know that getting people to see things their way can be tough. Your explanation might make sense to you, but you need to do something to dislodge what people might otherwise believe. This usually involves wrapping up the conventional explanation into the framework of the conspiracy. Allow me to explain. If I was going to pitch my snake oil or other shitty alternative medicine, people won't buy it unless they have a reason to distrust the existing treatments. This is why pretty much every single person into alternative medicine needs to first attack the established order. The logic of get infection, treat infection with antibiotics is too effective to compete with directly. They know that they can't engage scientifically because no natural remedy will perform as well as real medicine when actually tested. If it did, it would become the standard medical practice. Instead, you need to somehow establish a link between the problem and the current solution. This usually isn't hard, as people will already associate the two. For example, you naturally associate the doctor with disease. So, the natural thing for alternative medicine to do is to claim that the medical industry is actually causing the diseases and then selling the solution. This completely eliminates the problem of whether or not the solutions they're selling actually work. If I was into alternative medicine, I would just point out some negatives that have come from our current medical system, then claim that those are actually generated intentionally to keep you sick and take your money. Presto, you now distrust medicine and are primed to buy my supplement. Clearly, the AIDS epidemic was just caused by the government so they could sell AIDS cocktails. Similarly, I could just say that war was caused by the greedy companies in the military-industrial complex. Or perhaps, Big Smell gaslit the population into thinking they stink so that they would buy deodorant. Maybe time was invented by clock companies to sell more clocks. If thinking like this makes sense to you, please just sit down for a moment and think about what you're saying.
Stop it. Get some help.
We've noticed that there's a big three that get targeted by grifters to pitch their shitty ideology. Big Pharma, Big Agriculture, and the military-industrial complex. Admittedly, of these, Big Pharma is the most legitimately deplorable. But some bad actors don't mean that all of modern medicine is baloney.
After you take away the bread, cheese, lettuce, tomatoes, and mayonnaise, what have you got?
Don't let the grifters get you to throw the baby out with the bathwater. More specifically, don't let RFK get us to throw out vaccines with the opiates. We will eventually do a deep dive on all three of these big three and see if there's any credibility to the conspiracies. So, are we saying that no conspiracies exist? Well, no, theories get proven right all the time. It's certainly possible for plots against individuals or groups of people to exist. Usually, these plots and backroom deals are just handshake agreements between individual people, not government or society-wide schemes. And uncovering these details usually takes time and a boatload of evidence. The world is full of these agreements between individual people to conspire, but these are small deals between groups of people, not governments, corporations, or society-wide conspiracies. That type of conspiracy rarely works. You can only keep Enron going for so long before it blows up. What I call friendly neighborhood conspiracies are rampant, though. You'll never know about them, though, because the agreements made between two tight-lipped individuals are not likely to get leaked. But when dealing with society-wide trends or major current events, we will be quicker to think that these events are because of actors behaving with intention, especially against us directly. And we will often be too quick to put patterns together that are potentially completely phantom. If you find yourself thinking in any of these ways, or the people around you are, it would be wise to demand an incredibly high burden of evidence.
Why don't you prove it?
Far more evidence than your brain actually deems necessary. Otherwise, you risk having an understanding of the world closer to our favorite Midwestern neo-Nazi than you think. Next time, we'll look at how these concepts manifest in the field of science itself. Oh yes, ladies and gentlemen, the field of science is not immune to human nature, and this has led to some insane theories over the years. Thank you for watching. Make sure to shit yourself in the comments and tell us why we're jabronis.